As Jessica sat across from me, her face pale and her hands trembling, I slid the folder of evidence onto the table. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the photos, the texts, the financial statements I had meticulously gathered. "What is this?" she stammered, her voice cracking. I leaned forward, my voice calm but cold. "This is your reality, Jessica, and it's time to face the consequences." Huh. Now, the weight of her betrayal was clear in her expression, but she had no idea I had already secured everything: custody of the kids, the house, and my freedom. But before we dive deep into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you love this tale of justice and redemption, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss out on more gripping stories like this one. The soft glow of the computer screen cast faint shadows on the walls of Brandon McAllister's home office. This was his little world, filled with wires, monitors, and unwavering focus. Brandon sat at his desk, his fingers gliding across the keyboard, each rhythmic keystroke breaking the stillness of the night. Outside the window, the world slept under a star-filled sky, but he remained engrossed in his work. The clock read 9:37 p.m., but he paid no attention. Time seemed to melt away as he immersed himself in the pursuit of perfection, in every line of code, every solution, and every effort to provide for his family. In contrast, Jessica lived in a more dynamic world. She ran a successful fitness business, demanding just as much perseverance and effort. Yet her approach was entirely different. She tackled challenges with fiery enthusiasm, finding joy in social interactions and personal growth. Her desk was always tidy, her schedule meticulously planned, a reflection of her discipline and need for control. Meanwhile, Brandon's workspace was cluttered with notebooks and empty coffee cups, tangible evidence of quiet sacrifices made during long nights. The quiet of the late night was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Jessica's voice, calm yet serious, broke the silence. "Brandon? Can we talk?" Brandon glanced up as the door creaked open. Jessica stepped inside, her silhouette outlined by the hallway light. There was an unusual stillness about her, a calm that set his nerves on edge. She perched on the edge of the leather sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She put up her hand inside, slipped a finger under the lip. "What's up?" Brandon asked, swiveling his chair to face her. His tone was casual, but his eyes narrowed slightly, trying to read the emotions hidden in her guarded posture. Jessica took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I've been thinking about our marriage." Brandon's stomach tightened. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Okay," he said cautiously. "What about it?" "I need freedom," she said, her voice soft but resolute. He blinked, caught off guard. "Freedom? What are you talking about?" Jessica finally looked at him, her eyes searching his. "I feel trapped. I need to grow, to explore. I think we need space in our relationship. I want to experience life with other people." The words landed like a physical blow. Brandon froze, his mind scrambling to process what he had just heard. His jaw clenched and his hands balled into fists on his thighs. "You're saying you want to sleep with other men," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Jessica flinched but held her ground. "It's not just about that. It's about finding myself again. Our marriage, it feels stagnant." Brandon shot to his feet, pacing the small room. "Stagnant," he echoed bitterly. "Because I've been working late? Because I'm trying to give us a better life? That's what you're calling stagnant?" But she said nothing, simply replying whatever she had spoken before, but spoken without thinking, in an ominous tone. "That's not what I meant," she replied, her voice defensive. "I just feel like we've lost our spark." "Fair enough." He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes blazing. "And your solution is to sleep with other men, to break our vows?" Jessica stood abruptly, her calm facade cracking. "You don't understand. This is about my journey, my growth." "And what about me?" Brandon countered, his voice rising. "What about our children? What about the life we've built together?" Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "You've been so distant, Brandon. When was the last time we really connected?" He let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. "So this is my fault? My hard work is the reason you want to destroy our marriage? The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken words. For a moment, neither of them moved, their breaths uneven, their gazes locked. Finally, Brandon spoke, his voice cold. Get out of my office. I can't even look at you right now. Jessica hesitated but then turned and left, the door clicking softly behind her. Brandon sank into his chair, head in his hands. The weight of her words pressed down on him like a crushing tide. How had it come to this? In the days that followed their explosive conversation, Brandon couldn't shake a gnawing feeling of unease. Jessica's behavior became more erratic. Long hours at the gym, hushed phone conversations, and a growing distance between them. At first he tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to their unresolved argument. But then, late one night, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. A text lit up the screen. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. Tony. A shiny smiley face. Brandon's stomach churned as he stared at the message. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the phone, his heart pounding in his chest. Scrolling quickly through the notifications, he found a string of messages, plans for coffee dates, compliments about her appearance, and suggestive emojis that left no room for misinterpretation. His worst fears were confirmed. Determined to uncover the full truth, Brandon began his investigation. Late at night, while Jessica slept soundly beside him, he accessed her email account, a password they had once shared during more trusting times. There, he found flirtatious exchanges with multiple men, some dating back months. Phrases like, "I love the way you make me feel," and "let's keep this between us," burned into his memory. As the days passed, Brandon noticed more patterns. Jessica's late gym sessions didn't align with her usual routine. Once, while doing laundry, he found a new dress tucked at the back of the closet, something he had never seen her wear. He began taking screenshots of messages, downloading emails, and saving photos she had shared privately on social media. Each discovery felt like a knife to the heart, but Brandon channeled his pain into purpose. Meticulously, he documented everything, timelines, dates, and every word exchanged. He wasn't just collecting evidence. He was preparing for the inevitable confrontation that would define their future. Late one night, Brandon sat alone in the darkened living room, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound. His mind drifted back to the early days of their marriage, to a time when Jessica's laughter filled their home like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He could still picture her standing in the kitchen on a lazy Sunday morning, her messy bun framing a radiant smile as she flipped pancakes for Mia and Rye. She had been his partner, his confidant, and the anchor in his chaotic world. Now, that warmth was gone, replaced by cold indifference. Her once vibrant laughter had faded into curt nods and distracted murmurs. Mornings were no longer filled with shared moments, but with Jessica rushing out the door, phone in hand, muttering vague excuses about work or a client. Even the way she looked at him had changed. Her eyes, once full of love and admiration, now held a distance he couldn't bridge. Brandon's heart ached as he thought of their children. Mia's curiosity and Rye's boundless energy had always been their shared pride, the glue that held them together during tough times. But now that glue felt brittle. He worried about how Jessica's actions and his eventual confrontation would shatter the stability they had worked so hard to create. Anger simmered beneath the surface, a steady flame that threatened to consume him. How could she risk everything they had built for fleeting thrills? Yet, amidst the anger, a part of him still longed for the woman he had fallen in love with, the Jessica who had once seen him as enough. As dawn broke through the curtains, Brandon resolved to stay strong for Mia and Rye. Whatever pain he carried, he wouldn't let it touch them. The children deserved a sense of normalcy, even as their world quietly unraveled. The thought fortified him, giving him the strength to face whatever lay ahead. Brandon sat at his desk, the glow of his monitor reflecting his hardened expression. With each keystroke, he shifted money from their joint accounts into a secure one in his name. The movements were small, calculated, just enough to avoid raising suspicion. He downloaded years of financial records, preparing a clear picture of their assets. Each click felt like armor being forged, preparing him for the inevitable battle. His plan required precision. Jessica couldn't suspect a thing. Yet her behavior only added fuel to his resolve. She had become more brazen, disappearing for hours without explanation, her excuses growing thinner by the day. One evening, as Jessica walked into the kitchen after another unexplained outing, Brandon's patience finally snapped. "Where were you?" His tone was sharp, leaving no room for deflection. Jessica paused, startled by the edge in his voice. "At the gym," she replied casually, pouring herself a glass of water. "At 10 p.m., Brendan shot back, his gaze piercing. "What are you training for, the Olympics?" Her hand froze mid-pour, but she quickly recovered. "I had a client session that ran late. Why are you interrogating me?" "Because," Brandon said, his voice low but firm, "I don't buy it. You act like something is real for—" Jessica glared at him, her frustration evident. "You don't trust me anymore." Brandon let out a bitter laugh. "Trust? That's rich coming from you." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," he said, standing to meet her glare. "I see what's going on, Jessica. I'm not blind." Jessica's face hardened, but she said nothing, her silence more damning than any denial. Brandon leaned closer, his voice cold. "You want your freedom? Fine, but don't mistake my silence for stupidity." The tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. Jessica turned on her heel, leaving the room without another word. Brandon watched her go, his chest tight with anger and determination. Turning to him, later that night he accessed her computer, a space he had always respected as her domain. He found emails and social media messages, each one a new betrayal. There were flirtations, plans for meetings, even explicit exchanges. Brandon saved it all, creating a meticulous digital record. The next morning, over breakfast, Jessica tried to feign normalcy, but Brandon wasn't playing along. "Busy day ahead?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual. Jessica hesitated, sensing the trap. "Just the usual. Why?" "Life." "No reason," Brandon replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "I just like knowing where my wife is." Her fork clattered onto the plate, but she quickly masked her irritation. "I'm not doing this with you, Brandon." "Good," he said, his tone icy. "Because I'm done playing games." Meet with Jesse Dragonstark before packing a bag for the project. As Jessica left the house, Brandon felt a grim satisfaction. The cracks in her facade were growing, and he was ready to exploit them. He wasn't just preparing for legal action. He was preparing to reclaim control over his life. With every step, his resolve deepened. The truth would come out, and Jessica would face the consequences of her choices. The hum of the office seemed distant as Brandon sat hunched over his keyboard, pouring his frustration into his work. The project deadline loomed, but for the first time in weeks, he felt focused. Across from him, Ava leaned over her desk, her sharp eyes scanning a stack of code. "You're a machine," Ava said, breaking the silence. She smiled warmly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "How do you manage to churn out ideas like this under pressure?" Brandon glanced up, startled by the genuine admiration in her tone. "I guess it's easier to focus on work than other things," he said, his voice trailing off. Ava's brow furrowed slightly, her gaze softening. "Rough time at home?" He hesitated before nodding. "You could say that. It's been challenging." "Well, if it's any consolation," Ava said, her voice steady, "you're doing incredible work. It's not just the coding, it's the way you lead the team, how you stay calm when the rest of us are ready to throw our laptops out the window. That kind of focus is rare." Their words landed like a balm to his wounded pride. For so long, Brandon had been drowning in Jessica's betrayal, questioning his worth as a husband, a father, and a man. But here was Ava, someone who saw value in him without ulterior motives. He found himself comparing the two women. Jessica, once a source of light in his life, had become a storm of deception and selfishness. Her words, once loving, were now sharp and dismissive. In contrast, Ava's presence was grounding, her compliments sincere. She wasn't trying to manipulate or distract him, she was simply acknowledging his worth. "Thanks, Ava," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I needed to hear that." She returned the smile, her eyes sparkling. Anytime, you're not just good at what you do, Brandon, you're one of the best. Don't forget that. As she turned back to her work, Brandon sat in silence, a new feeling stirring within him. It wasn't just gratitude for Ava's words. It was the realization that he deserved better. Better than Jessica's lies. Better than a one-sided marriage. Ava's genuine kindness reignited a confidence in him that had long been dormant. For the first time in weeks, Brandon felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was starting to rebuild. And this time, he would do it on his own terms. The Saturday air was crisp as Brandon sat in his car, parked discreetly across the street from Magnolia Cafe. He adjusted his rearview mirror, catching sight of Jessica through the window. She sat at a corner table, her laughter ringing out as she leaned closer to a tall, sharply dressed man. His hand rested on hers across the table. Brandon's chest tightened. The scene confirmed what he already knew, but seeing it with his own eyes was a different kind of pain. His grip on the camera in his lap tightened, his fingers trembling slightly. This was not the life he had envisioned for himself or his children. He raised the camera, its lens trained on the couple. Each click of the shutter felt like a dagger, but also a form of vindication. Jessica's animated expressions, the man's lingering touch, the casual intimacy. They left no room for doubt. Brandon's hand shook as he zoomed in on their clasped hands, her head tilted toward the man in a way she hadn't done with him in years. Moments later, the man reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair from Jessica's face. Her smile was soft, warm, so different from the detached looks she gave Brandon at home. He captured the moment, his resolve hardening with each shot. The couple stood and began walking toward a nearby park. Brandon followed at a safe distance, his heart pounding as he trailed them down the path. He crouched behind a cluster of bushes when they paused, watching as Jessica leaned in and kissed the man deeply. His breath hitched, a mix of fury and heartbreak surging through him. This was it, the proof he needed. Carefully, he snapped one last photo before retreating to his car. As he drove home, a grim determination settled over him. Jessica's betrayal was undeniable, and now he had the evidence to confront her and take control of the situation. Brandon sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, his movements measured and calm. Jessica entered the room, her phone in hand, her expression guarded. He glanced up, a faint smile tugging at his lips, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice smooth, almost too casual. Jessica hesitated, sensing something different about him. "Morning," she replied, sliding into the chair across from him. She listens as he talks. He took another sip, setting the mug down deliberately. "You know," he began, his tone light but laced with a subtle edge. "Ava had some great ideas for the project yesterday. We stayed late hashing them out." Jessica froze for a fraction of a second before recovering, her tone clipped. "Ava?" "Yeah," Brandon replied, his eyes meeting hers with unsettling intensity. "She's brilliant. It's refreshing to work with someone so passionate about what they do." Jessica forced a thin smile, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug. "Sounds like you two get along." "We do," he said simply, leaning back in his chair. "She really appreciates my dedication. It's nice to feel valued." Jessica's jaw tightened, her mask of indifference slipping ever so slightly. "Well, it's good that someone at work notices." Brandon tilted his head, studying her. "It's interesting," he said, his voice calm but cutting. "She sees things in me that I thought were invisible these days." His gaze swept her up. Her eyes flickered with something he hadn't seen in weeks and concern. She opened her mouth to respond, but he stood abruptly, cutting off whatever excuse or retort she was about to offer. "I'll be late tonight," he said, his tone neutral as he grabbed his keys. "Big deadline coming up. Don't wait up." As he walked out the door, Brandon felt a flicker of satisfaction. Jessica wasn't the only one who could plant doubt. The tables were beginning to turn, and for the first time, he felt truly in control. Brandon sat at the living room table, his laptop open and a folder of printed documents resting on its surface. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Jessica entered, her phone in hand, pausing when she saw his expression. Calm, composed, but with a sharpness in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "Jessica," Brandon began, his voice steady, almost clinical, "we need to talk." Her brows furrowed as she set her phone down. "What's this about?" Without a word, Brandon turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a series of photos. Jessica at a cafe with Anthony, their intimate walk in the park, the kiss that left no room for doubt. Her face paled as she stared at the images, her hand instinctively going to her mouth. Like Anthony, she stared in the direction of the lighthouse, out of sight of anyone. "What is this?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "It's the truth," Brandon replied coldly. "Your truth." Jessica's eyes darted between the screen and Brandon, her breath quickening. I can explain." "Please," Brandon said, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. "Go ahead, I'd love to hear it." She hesitated, her composure crumbling. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice desperate. "This isn't about you, Brandon. It's about me. About my growth, my freedom." "Your growth?" Brandon repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. "And that required lies? Deception? Betrayal?" Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out toward him. "I never meant to hurt you." Brandon didn't flinch, his gaze cutting through her defenses. "You didn't just hurt me, Jessica. You destroyed everything we built. Our trust, our family." Her shoulders slumped, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. For once, she had no retort, no excuse. She simply whispered, "I'm sorry." All of a sudden, but Brandon shook his head. Sorry isn't enough. Not anymore. The silence that followed was deafening, the realization of the consequences etched into Jessica's tear-streaked face. For Brandon, this was the moment the scales tipped, where regret could no longer outweigh the damage done. Brandon sat across from Jessica at the dining table, a thick folder resting between them. The dim light of the chandelier cast sharp shadows on his face, emphasizing the calm yet unyielding determination in his eyes. Jessica, on the other hand, sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The tension in the air was palpable. "I think it's time we stop pretending," Brandon began, his voice even, almost too measured. He slid the folder across the table toward her. "These are the divorce papers." Jessica's breath hitched as she stared at the folder, her hands remaining frozen in her lap. "Divorce?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Brandon, no. We can fix this. We can—" "No," Brandon interrupted, his tone firm but devoid of malice. "We can't fix this, and I won't pretend that we can. What you've done, what you've chosen, has consequences." Her eyes darted to the folder and back to him, a mix of panic and disbelief washing over her face. "But the kids, Brandon, we have a family. You can't just—" "I can," he said, cutting her off again, "and I will. For Mia and Rye's sake, I've outlined terms that prioritize their stability. They stay with me. You'll have visitation rights, but their home will be here." Jessica's face crumpled as she reached for the folder, flipping it open with trembling hands. Her eyes skimmed the pages and her voice grew frantic. "This isn't fair. You're taking everything." Brandon leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Fair?" he echoed quietly. "Was it fair when you lied? When you risked our children's sense of security for your freedom?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked up at him. "Brendan, please. I made mistakes, but we've been together for 12 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It did," Brandon replied, his voice softening for the first time. "But the person I married isn't sitting in front of me anymore." Her pleading gaze faltered under the weight of his words. Brandon stood, pushing his chair back smoothly. "You can sign the papers," he said, "or we can take this to court. Either way, I'm done." As he walked away, the sound of Jessica's quiet sobs filled the room. Brandon didn't look back. His steps were steady, his resolve unshaken. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of clarity, a certainty that this was the only way forward. Jessica sat alone at the dining table, the folder of divorce papers open before her. The crisp white pages seemed to blur as tears streamed down her face. She wiped at them with trembling hands, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. The realization of what she had lost crashed over her in waves. Brandon stood by the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He didn't press her, didn't speak. His silence was more cutting than any words he could have said. Finally, Jessica broke it. "Brandon," she began, her voice hoarse. "Please, can't we talk about this? I know I made mistakes, but I didn't mean to hurt you like this." He didn't move, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Jessica, we've talked enough. This is where it ends." Her lip quivered and she looked down at the papers again, her fingers tracing the edges of the pages. "But the kids, how will they understand? How will I—" Her voice cracked and she looked up at him, desperation shining in her eyes. "I can be better. I can fix this." Brandon exhaled, his tone calm but firm. "It's too late. This isn't just about me. It's about what's best for Mia and Rye. They deserve stability. They deserve better than this." Jessica's shoulders slumped as her strength gave way to the weight of her choices. Her hand reached for the pen beside the folder, but she hesitated. "I didn't want it to end like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "And yet, here we are," Brandon said quietly, the sadness in his tone barely masked by his resolve. Jessica's hand shook as she signed the papers, each stroke feeling like a nail in the coffin of their marriage. When she finally set the pen down, she let out a shuddering sob, burying her face in her hands. Brandon didn't react. He picked up the folder, glanced at the signature, and nodded. "Thank you," he said simply, then turned and walked away, leaving Jessica alone with the echoes of her defeat. The soft hum of the dishwasher filled the quiet kitchen as Brandon sat with Mia and Rye at the dining table. A plate of untouched cookies sat in the center, but neither child seemed interested. Mia stared at her hands, her small fingers twisting together anxiously. Rye leaned against his chair, fidgeting with a toy car, his usual exuberance muted. "Dad?" Mia finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's going to happen to us? To our family?" Brandon's heart ached at the vulnerability in her question. He reached across the table, gently taking her hands in his. "Mia, no matter what happens, one thing will never change. I love you and Rye more than anything, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you both feel safe and loved." Tears welled in Mia's eyes as she looked up at him. "But Mom's leaving, isn't she?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Does that mean we're not a family anymore?" Brandon swallowed the lump in his throat, determined to stay strong for his children. "We'll always be a family," he said, his voice steady. "It might look a little different, but the love we share doesn't change. Your mom and I will both be here for you, even if we're not together." Rye looked up, his toy car forgotten. "Will we have to move?" he asked, his brow furrowed with worry. Brandon shook his head. "No, buddy. You'll stay right here. You'll still have your rooms, your school, and all your friends. This will always be your home." Mia's tears spilled over as she leaned forward, wrapping her arms around Brandon's neck. "I don't want things to change," she sobbed. "I just want us to be like we were before." Brandon held her tightly, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. "I know, sweetheart," he whispered. "Change is hard, but we'll get through this together. I promise." Rye climbed onto Brandon's lap, hugging him tightly. "We love you, Dad," he said softly. Brandon kissed the top of Rye's head, holding them both close. "And I love you, more than you'll ever know." As the children clung to him, Brandon felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he would face it with unwavering strength. For Mia, for Rye, and for the future they deserved. Brandon sat across from the lawyer in a sunlit office, the leather chair firm beneath him as he straightened his posture. Papers were spread across the desk, financial records, printed screenshots of messages, and photographs detailing Jessica's infidelity. The lawyer, a poised woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, flipped through the documents with precision. When she looked up, her expression was confident. "Mr. McAllister, you're in a very strong position here," she began, her tone professional but reassuring. "The evidence of your wife's infidelity, combined with your financial stability and the steps you've taken to protect your assets, puts you at a clear advantage. Courts prioritize the best interests of the children, And given your role as the primary provider and the stability you can offer, securing primary custody is highly likely. Brandon exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. And Jessica? He asked, his voice steady but cautious. The lawyer nodded, understanding his concern. She'll likely argue for more involvement, but the documentation you've provided weakens her case. Her actions show a disregard for the stability and well-being of the family. We'll focus on ensuring Mia and Rye's lives are disrupted as little as possible. We have to find some hope for her soul, any hope, on its side. Brandon's lips tightened into a thin line. I want to protect my kids, he said firmly. That's my priority. The lawyer's expression softened slightly. And that's exactly what you're doing. This process won't be easy, but with this evidence and your approach, you're prepared. As Brandon left the office, the weight of the situation pressed on him, but there was also a sense of clarity. He was taking control, not just for himself, but for his children. That evening, the atmosphere at home was heavy. Jessica stood in the doorway of their bedroom, a suitcase open on the bed. Clothes were folded neatly beside it, but the act of packing felt anything but orderly. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she were delaying the inevitable. Brandon stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall. He didn't offer to help, nor did he say much. The silence between them was thick, only broken by the soft sound of zippers and the occasional rustle of fabric. Jessica paused, glancing at him over her shoulder. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with redness. This isn't how I wanted things to end, she murmured. Brandon's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm when he spoke. It's not just about what you wanted, Jessica. It's about the choices you made. Her gaze dropped, and she resumed packing, each movement filled with a quiet resignation. When the suitcase was finally closed, she hesitated again, looking around the room. The family photos on the walls, the small mementos of their life together. They seemed to mock her now. I'll be staying with Emily for a while, she said softly, as if the words might shatter the fragile quiet. Brandon nodded, his expression unreadable. Take the time you need, he replied, his tone detached. When Jessica finally left the house, suitcase in hand, the sound of the door closing behind her echoed through the now empty hallway. Brandon stood in the living room, the weight of the moment settling over him. The house felt eerily quiet, as if her departure had taken more than just her presence. It had taken the life they once shared. He looked around, his eyes lingering on the family portraits on the mantel, the toys left scattered by Mia and Rye, and the worn grooves in the couch from years of shared laughter. The emptiness was palpable, but it wasn't all-consuming. Instead, it felt like a clearing, a space where something new could begin. Brandon took a deep breath, the stillness of the house both comforting and sobering. The end of his marriage had finally arrived, but it wasn't the end of everything. It was a chance to rebuild, to create a new life for himself and his children. One step at a time, he would fill the empty spaces with something stronger, something better. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Brandon poured 2 bowls of cereal for Mia and Rye. The hum of the coffee maker and the giggles of his children brought a quiet warmth to the space. For the first time in months, the house felt alive, not with tension or pretense, but with genuine ease. As the kids ate, Brandon leaned against the counter, watching them talk about their plans for the day. Their resilience astounded him. Despite everything, Mia's curiosity and Rye's boundless energy hadn't wavered. They were his anchor, his reason to keep moving forward. Later that day, as he wrapped up work, a familiar name lit up his phone screen. Ava had texted, asking if he wanted to grab coffee. Brandon hesitated for a moment before replying with a simple, "Sure, let's meet." At the cafe, the conversation flowed effortlessly. Ava's kindness and humor brought a sense of normalcy Brandon hadn't realized he missed. As they laughed over a story about a glitch in their recent project, she looked at him thoughtfully, pausing. "You seem, lighter," she said, her voice gentle. "Like you're starting to find your footing again." Brandon nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I think I am. It's been a journey, but the kids keep me grounded, and," he paused, glancing at her, "having good friends helps." Ava's eyes sparkled as she smiled back. Well, if you ever need another distraction, I'm always up for coffee. And terrible coding jokes. Brandon chuckled, the warmth of her words settling over him. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility of a future that wasn't weighed down by the past. As he left the cafe, the sun shining brightly overhead, Brandon felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. Resilience is born in the crucible of hardship, and Brandon's journey illustrates the strength that emerges from facing betrayal head-on. Despite the emotional wreckage caused by Jessica's actions, Brandon found the resolve to prioritize what mattered most: his children. Their well-being became his guiding light, allowing him to channel his pain into purpose. Love for his children provided the foundation for his recovery. Through their laughter and innocent questions, Brandon rediscovered the meaning of family, not perfection, but unwavering support and care. This love reminded him of his worth, helping him reclaim the personal power that Jessica's betrayal had threatened to steal. Finally, his story is one of rebirth. Brandon didn't just survive, he thrived, using the ashes of his past to build a stronger, more authentic future. His resilience, rooted in self-respect and love, paved the way for hope, renewal, and a brighter tomorrow. Brandon stood on the back porch, watching Mia and Rai chase each other through the yard, their laughter carried on the warm evening breeze. The setting sun bathed the world in hues of gold and orange, a fitting backdrop for the sense of peace that now enveloped him. "Dad," Mia called, running up to him with a wide grin. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes sparkling. "Come play tag with us." Brandon chuckled, setting down his coffee mug. "All right, but I'm warning you, your old man's still pretty fast." As he joined them, the sound of their laughter filled the air, a melody more soothing than any words could be. In that moment, Brandon felt the weight of the past truly begin to lift. His heart, once burdened with anger and pain, now held only determination and love. Later, as the children sat beside him on the porch, tired but happy, Mia leaned her head against his arm. "Dad," she whispered, her voice soft but certain, "we're going to be okay, right?" Brandon looked down at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're not just going to be okay, sweetheart," he said with a smile. "We're going to be great. I promise." Mia smiled, her faith in him shining brightly, while Rai snuggled against his other side. In that quiet moment, Brandon felt a clarity and strength he hadn't known in months. The future wasn't without challenges, but it was full of possibility. A blank slate ready to be filled with love, growth, and laughter. As the first stars began to appear in the night sky, Brandon held his children close. Together, they were starting a new chapter, one built on resilience, love, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow.